Today's lecture is underwritten by the Winifred S. Dibert Fund for Chautauqua. A longtime supporter of the institution, she was one of 4 major donors who made the transformation of Normal Hall into Bratton Theater possible. She was a pillar in her community here and in Jamestown. We are grateful to persons like Winifred Dibert who looked ahead to our present day, and we thank those of you who support Chautauqua. And as we begin this week of programming on comedy and the human condition, I want to acknowledge the tremendous partnership we've embarked upon with the National Comedy Center. Please welcome National Comedy Center Executive Director Journey Gunderson to say a few words about the center.
Thank you all and good morning, and thank you, Matt, for that lovely introduction. This partnership is a long time coming, and it's not just because the Department of Religion calendar has always sounded like a classic joke setup. You've got the priests, the rabbis, and the ministers, but what is missing is the bar. Thank you. The National Comedy Center will honor the craft and its legendary contributors with its world-renowned exhibit experience, celebrate the best of contemporary programming, and cultivate comedic arts with professional development and support for artists. This partnership makes sense because of the synergy in values. This audience, Chautauquans, appreciate good programming and great minds. Preceding feasibility analysis on the Comedy Center project tells us that quality programming is the key to sustainability, and there's a reason Chautauqua's been around for 143 years. As for great minds, anyone who sees just the George Carlin exhibit on Bester Plaza or in Jamestown this week can tell you good comedians are brilliant minds. So while Chautauqua's got over 100 years on us, it's the dedication to meaningful discourse, education, and the arts that is the synergy on which this partnership thrives and the value on which cultural institutions remain relevant. Paraphrasing Chautauqua's president, Michael Hill, we live in a time when access to information abounds. We are, however, in short supply of wisdom, of information placed in context, of authentic meaning. We, like Chautauqua, seek to provide that important context. Why were Carlin's 7 dirty words or Lenny Bruce's quips about the institutions of religion or government more than just jokes? What does their having been arrested on stage tell us about free speech? These weren't just joke tellers, these were truth tellers and pillars of the First Amendment. But how does all comedy, edgy or not, affect the human condition, our theme this week? It's said that drama helps us dream about who we want to be, but comedy helps us live with who we are. This week and long term, we will elevate this craft and comics to art form and artists. Your speaker today and a donor of ours, Lewis Black, said, "It's important that the National Comedy Center exists so a 10-year-old kid with an affection for comedy has a place to go." Again, Michael Hill of Chautauqua, the work of this institution has the capacity to enlighten the young to a life of the arts. I've drawn this comparison more than once in making the case for the Comedy Center for 7 years now. Your presence here demonstrates that, yes, people will travel from all over the country and all over the world for a cultural institution, even in the far west corner of New York. Drawing this parallel has been a little more helpful than some of the taglines we tried out recently. Jamestown, New York, the Niagara Falls of comedy. Or only 145 miles from Cleveland. Or my personal favorite, surely you can't be serious. Well, since exploring the best in human values was taken, we settled on the story of comedy lives here. We hope you'll visit Jamestown via the shuttle to the Lucille Ball Comedy Festival, which we produce in honor of our visionary, and to engage with the story of comedy for years to come. And since I'll be at the Hall of Philosophy at the 2 p.m. program this Friday, I can actually close on, I'll be here all week. Thank you very much.
Our guest this morning is comedian and king of the rant, Lewis Black. With a trademark style of comedic yelling and assertive finger-pointing, Mr. Black provides searing criticism with a dose of hilarity. After earning degrees from the University of North Carolina and Yale Drama School, Lewis Black became the playwright in residence at West Bank Cafe's Downstairs Theater Bar in New York City. While there, he oversaw the development of more than 1,000 plays, including several of his own pieces, and works by the likes of Aaron Sorkin and Alan Ball. After leaving West Bank to pursue stand-up full-time, Lewis Black was invited to create a segment for Comedy Central's The Daily Show. What began as a 3-minute rant in 1996 evolved into Back in Black, one of the most popular and longest-running segments on the show for both Jon Stewart and Trevor Noah. 9 comedy albums, 2 HBO specials, 5 Grammy nominations and 2 wins, 3 best-selling books, and more than 40 plays. Let us not forget that he notably voiced the character Anger in Pixar's Inside Out. Which, by the way, we will be screening on Bestor Plaza tomorrow night with a brief introduction by Anger himself. We are incredibly pleased and honored to have Lewis Black here to open our week in partnership with the National Comedy Center. Please join me in greeting Lewis Black on his second visit to Chautauqua and his first on our platform.
I think I'd like to thank Matt, and really that's what Matt had to say is all that need to be said. So I really hope you have a great day today and that it's really special. I have to say that first off, that I hope you like my ass. And it's my most endearing feature. I don't know if you realize that what goes on here now is completely counter to what's occurring in the country. So, you have to realize that this is, what you're doing is wrong. It's shameful on levels that really, well, as I was coming here yesterday, I was just, I was disgusted. We're having a great experiment in this country, and I wish to God you'd be a part of it. We have tried as a nation to use our intelligence to better ourselves, and it just didn't work. So we're just going to go. We're just experimenting with the concept of doing things ignorantly as humanly possible. We will. Sure, there's a fact, but fuck it. So, if you're the ones who are making it impossible for us to move forward. I didn't want to use that bad word so quickly. Comedy is easy. Writing a speech about comedy is exhausting. There was a very nice article in today's paper. And he did a very nice job, Brian did, and it said that Blackwell opens week with examination of comics' role in society. Well, no. That won't be happening. I could tell you about the breakfast rolls I've eaten during the course of my life. First, let me just tell you there are a few things you should know about comedy. 10:45 a.m. is not and has never been a conducive time for comedy. It's a great time for yoga, Pilates, or even a second cup of coffee. 10:45 p.m. is actually a much better time, but many of you would be asleep by then. Heat, warmth is not conducive to comedy. You don't do comedy in heat. Heat is for when, like a sauna or a steam room, or when it's really cold outside. I did the Letterman show twice. He notoriously kept that room cold. It was 60 degrees, and people laughed just to keep warm. Daylight is not conducive to comedy. It's good for gardening or a religious service, or if you're telling time with a sundial. Nighttime is the time for funny. After a day of insanity, nighttime is when one finds their sense of humor again. Comedy comes out of the darkness like ghost stories do, only with a punchline. The outdoors is not conducive to comedy. It's good for badminton or volleyball or hiking. If you jog by me, don't look at me today. Is it? Well, this is why I don't give fucking speeches. The outdoors may be the worst thing for comedy, especially for stand-up comedy. You see, stand-up comedy is rooted in silence. Silence. That's where comedy has its roots, not in the sounds of birds or planes or children at play. Silence. That is where the chemistry of laughter begins. It's where the tension is formed that is ultimately released through the laugh. This will be difficult to understand. It took me a long time to grasp it. Comedy, at its simplest, is tension release. That's it. That's what it is. And there is nothing, and I mean nothing, less conducive to comedy than talking about it. So, all in all, I am thrilled to be here. I stand apparently where 9 presidents, including FDR, stood, Supreme Court justices such as Anthony Kennedy, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Sandra Day O'Connor, Elie Wiesel, Jane Goodall, and Tom Brokaw have all spoken here. I couldn't be more honored to be here and more appalled that you've asked me to come and speak to you. Did you run out of noteworthy individuals? People of substance? Were all the Nobel Prize winners busy this week? Seriously, I know a bit of the history of this place, and my standing here in the light of that makes no sense. This, I gather, from what I've read, is the first time Chautauqua has devoted a week to comedy. Really? Did the election depress you so much that you finally remembered there is an artistic endeavor called comedy? Comedy? Oh, yeah. How does that work again? That's right, you're upset, and when you hear something funny, you laugh, and then you're not depressed. It took you 140 years to finally get around to comedy? The kind of thing you like to do is to walk a 9-year-old out of your audience. No one said, oh yeah, the 10-year-olds will be here just after they do their elementary school playthings. Look, if there was ever a place that was ripe for being made fun of, it's here, where it is so idyllic and precious that it can leave one mildly nauseous. I think I'm even developing a case of eczema, and I've been here less than 24 hours. But we here in Chautauqua are not interested in the laughter part. We want to talk about it, talk it to death, until we barely have enough breath to laugh. So let's talk about comedy. As I said, I have no desire to discuss its importance, its necessity, its ability to speak truth to power, or how it can confront even the most sensitive issues of our time, and in so doing, often testing what society identifies as offensive. Fuck that! I will tell you what I know. I'm 68 years old, and people still come up to me after I perform and say, I really like you, but why do you have to use so many dirty words? I wanted to do a comedy special at the Kennedy Center, and they said that I use the F word too much. Someone actually watched my previous special and counted the amount of times I used the word. 42. In light of the last election, that number has risen quite a lot. Seriously. Is it that unusual for a comic who spent his entire life watching the gap widen between what this country is and what it really should be to use words that help us express anger, frustration, and rage? These aren't dirty words. Not in the least. I don't care what your religion tells you. These are words God gave to adults to use. Pussy feathers doesn't help. Is that when you read that Donald Trump won the election, did you go, oh, pshaw? Here's what I know about comedy. I've had more people than should have approach me and say, I'm very funny. Everyone tells me I am. I could be a comic. No, you can't. Not unless you're a natural. And I've only met 2 in my life. So good luck. Knock 'em dead. What exactly separates the person who is funny from the comic? The distance from where you're sitting to here. Five feet that separates you from being funny in your seat in the audience to being on stage in front of that audience. It's a lot easier to be funny in front of your friends who think you're funny than convincing a room full of strangers that you are funny. So that 3 feet for 5 feet is really 1,000 miles of wandering the country from one hellhole to the next, and thousands of performances, many of them ultimately humiliating on levels that you can't even begin to imagine, in rooms so disgusting that one's death begins to seem to be a reasonable alternative. And speaking of death, in order to be a comic, you have to love dying on stage. Sure, they haven't laughed. Sure, they're heckling me to the point of tears. But this one's really gonna get them. You stand there in front of a group of people, and not one person in the room laughs at you. And they are disgusted. And you've been on stage for 7 minutes, and nothing has happened. And yet, as you watch yourself drop dead in front of yourself, you still believe, son of a bitch, I didn't do this joke. I will be resurrected. So in the end, you've got to love failing in front of a lot of people, because that's how you learn what's funny and why you're funny. And it's no fun. You've got to really be somewhat of an idiot to be a comic. To put it another way, it's like learning to be a boxer, but only your hands are tied. And so you can't do much to retaliate against an opponent who is pummeling you. So after the fight, you go, gee, if I'd only raised my right hand, I could have blocked the punch and got that guy with my left fist. It's just like the audience beats you senseless. And then precisely you go back and go, oh yeah, you learn through failure. I knew there'd be a baby here. And if you just gave birth, I want credit. That was actually the sound in my head 2 minutes before I had to come up here. So, are there people who just aren't funny, who are bereft of a sense of humor? Maybe the Amish? I've always wondered about them, and who hasn't? I really thought that was a lot funnier than you pricks gave me. That's judgmental. Some of you judged that. That's why you didn't laugh. You went, why is he going after the Amish? I know from experience that many in the Midwest and the South don't seem to grasp sarcasm and sometimes irony. But cable and the internet is changing that. For a number of years, I taught the experience of stand-up. In a week, I'd get students up on stage to be funny. And even though many of my students were training to be actors, they were scared to death of stand-up. Many didn't believe they were funny at all. What I tell everyone that I've ever taught stand-up, and I truly believe this, that everyone has at least one funny story to tell, and if you don't, it's time to get a new life. You may want to move. Everyone that I've ever taught was funny. Every single person. Wasn't me, it was them. All I did was provide a bit of guidance. This is true, but sadly, many of those who pursued stand-up after they took my class were generally those who were the least funny. And those whom I actually thought could make it as comics went on to having productive lives. It's extremely rare, I think, that someone doesn't have a sense of humor. Anyone who has ever laughed has a sense of humor. I've met very few people that I believe have never laughed. So how come there are people who just don't seem to have a sense of humor? Outside of some sort of psychological condition, the reason I believe that exists, that some people appear this way, is that it was never developed. I think one's sense of humor is like a muscle. It's a muscle that is usually exercised by family and friends, but rarely, if ever, is it exercised in the halls of academia. It took you 143 years. From elementary school through high school, we teach every subject under the sun, but we hardly ever teach comedy. You really, and I understand this, don't want to give kids that kind of weapon in a classroom. So it's a muscle. Among a number of us, that begins to atrophy. So I was lucky that both my parents had great senses of humor and are still with me. They are 98 and 99. And those of you who didn't applaud, what kind of pricks are you? I know I've wandered these grounds. You're going, well, 99, what's 99? I'm still jogging, asshole. When my mother turned 98, I asked her what it was like, and she said, no one should live this long. I went through all the years today, and you know what? They don't add up. After the presidential election, I asked my father what he thought, and he laughed and laughed, and he kept laughing. It was starting to scare me. So I said, what do you really think? And he laughed harder. This is how dark my mother's sense of humor was. She was a terrible cook, and I mean terrible. My mother got a Cuisinart, and she was very excited by it, and she brought out her concept of coleslaw, which was she had mashed it, and it had been in the Cuisinart so long there was one piece of cabbage, and the rest looked like milk. I always felt she cooked this way so that my brother and I would enjoy industrial cooking. One night, and one night only, she cooked an unbelievable meal, and one that was not easy at all. It was incredible. And we never saw a meal like that again. Years later, I asked her why. And she said, I just wanted to show you I could really cook well if I wanted to. I just had better things to do. One day I saw my dad reading a copy of Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and he was laughing. I'd never seen him laughing while reading anything. I asked him if I should read it, and he said absolutely. It would tell me all I needed to know about working in an office and life in general. I was 13 at the time. I read it. I laughed hard, really hard. And I learned as much about life as I have from any work of nonfiction. It altered the way I looked at what was going on around me. A few years later, I stumbled on to Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. Between these two books, I realized I wasn't crazy. There was another way of looking at the world. They changed my perception of myself and the world I was living in. I was right. I was right to think that one couldn't protect oneself by climbing under a wooden desk in case of a nuclear attack. That idea was not only insane, it was funny. And so I learned not only what I found to be truly funny, I also learned just because someone is in charge, it didn't make them right. I could trust what I was seeing and I could laugh about it. So I began to search for things that I found funny, and that led me to subscribe to a satiric magazine called The Realist. That'll give you an idea of how many readers it had. It was an unbelievable piece of work at the time, and I started getting it when I was 15. And my parents, I can't believe they allowed it in the house. I don't think they ever looked at it. And it was more precious to me than all the breasts that Playboy could deliver. It was a pathologically dark, really dark humor magazine for which Paul Krasner was the inspiration, publisher, and editor. I'll never forget opening one issue, and there, smack dab in the middle of the magazine, was a panorama of all the Disney characters. On first look, it was seemingly harmless, but on closer inspection, you realized every one of them was doing something completely perverse. Dumbo was taking a dump on Donald Duck. Goofy was screwing Minnie Mouse. You can't even laugh at it now, can you? Wow. Wow, folks. Wow. And Mickey was shooting heroin. I won't even tell you what the 7 dwarves were up to. Many of you would begin to weep. The creation of a former Disney artist had taken the Vatican of children's lore and cut it down to size. Disney, I heard, wanted to sue him, but eventually changed its corporate mind. These books, this magazine, and the comedy of George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and Lenny Bruce, they were like taking a drug that inoculated me from losing my mind because it altered my point of view. It made me easier for me to cope with a world that appeared to be crazy to me. To put it really simply, watching Slim Pickens in Dr. Strangelove riding the A-bomb down to Russia, waving his cowboy hat, made it very easy for me to stop worrying and love the bomb. The rest of you see the movie. Okay? Just see it. There's a thing, you can get it online. I'll talk to you about it some other time. So I believe as a comic, and as someone who loves to laugh, that comedy has an effect on the individual, and when enough individuals are affected, it might affect our society. But no one sets out to change or transform the world through comedy. It's comedy. The most important thing is the laugh. Anything else is dumb luck. But what about The Daily Show with Jon Stewart? Didn't that have a profound effect on our society? Who knows? But it didn't set out to do that. It set out to be as funny as it could be. I will tell you that. Jon Stewart will tell you that. The writers of the show will tell you that. Nothing flew unless it was funny. I see all of these shows, Samantha Bee's, John Oliver's, and Bill Maher's, as insulation from the madness that we witness daily. It allows us to step back for a moment from the madness and regroup and realize that this too shall pass. Hopefully. Political correctness, by the way, is the arch enemy of comedy. It has nothing to do with comedy. If you bring it into the room with you, you're a prick. Political correctness is for discussions on the porches of Chautauqua and in classrooms of universities, but it has no place in deciding what is or isn't funny. That is left up entirely to the individual, because in the end, humor is subjective. I will have 1,000 people in the audience laughing at a show of mine, and then open Facebook, and a few of the members of that audience, having sat there, will tell me I'm not funny. And I'm not to them. They're right. It's because of what their sense of humor is. Political correctness is way too judgmental for comedy. I hear it sometimes when many in the audience won't laugh at a joke because they judge the joke before you get to the punchline. They miss the point of the joke. They hear something. They hear a buzzword and their brain goes cold and numb. And they go, well, that son of a bitch, I can't believe. And then the joke occurs. In my act, after spending 15 minutes talking about how we've neglected those with mental illness, I say the following. Now that the gays are out of the closet, the next group that has to come out are the mentally ill. But they're mentally ill, so they don't know where the door handle is. And the audience, at least a good third every night, makes a judgment then and there. And as a result, they don't get to the final line, which is, so we have to open the door for them. Comedy shouldn't go after the weak, the defenseless, the misogynistic, and it shouldn't be misogynistic, homophobic, or racist. But sometimes you're going to laugh at something you shouldn't. That's okay. Quietly, afterwards, you should say to yourself, I was a bad person to laugh at that. When all is said and done, I feel it is comedy that brings us together. At our gatherings, we tell our tales. You won't believe what happened to me. Well, you think that's something. Wait till you hear what happened to me. Well, that's nothing compared with, and on and on. We try to one-up each other. We try and make our friends laugh. We don't generally look to get together for pity parties. Boy, I can't wait to get together with my pals and have a few good weeps. We like to and we want to laugh. And just what is a laugh? While it's as mysterious as music, I see laughter as a comic hiccup that allows us to stare into the abyss while we straddle the grave. It makes a bad day bearable. It gives us the breathing room to deal with life's nonsense and bullshit. It is the mechanism that allows us to cope with the deepest emotional pains and scars. And while sometimes it can be coaxed, laughter by and large is a completely uncontrollable physical reaction that seems to come out of nowhere. So what it comes to is this. I think that comedy and religion share a lot of similarities. They both help people gather in a space to share a common vision. They both give people a sense. They both give people, get it right, a sense of transcendence. They both offer comfort. They both are mysteries. And they both gather their biggest crowds on weekends. But religion never really worked for me. Prayer wasn't my strong suit. I don't really enjoy praying with a lot of people. I love laughing with them. That's what I have to say. I don't know if it's cleared anything up for you. But it's been a privilege and a pleasure to speak here in this hallowed space. And my only regret is my parents couldn't be here. Sorry about that. I hate when I start getting weepy. I just spent the whole fucking speech going, it's all about the laugh. My parents would like it. My mother would say, why'd you have to, you didn't have to talk about my cooking. But she said, she asked me, we were here when I was very young. And so she said, is it the same as it was? And I went, yeah. I also regret that somehow we can't spread the intelligence that blankets these grounds throughout the rest of the country. And I hope the idiots don't find out what you're up to out here, or we're screwed. Thank you.
Stay right there. We'll do a few
Okay, sure.
So as we enter into our Q&A portion, there may be a few people leaving. Know that Louis may comment as you're leaving. But please do be as respectful as possible to your friends and neighbors here in this space. Know that you can also ask questions via Twitter at #CHQ2017. To begin, Louis, I remember just reading last week a declaration of how comedy post-election will, the questions of, is comedy as it exists now over, or is comedy changing fundamentally? And I think about post 9/11, the questions of, is satire dead? Yeah. And my question is, from journalists and others who are making those statements, how that's received within the world that knows that art form best, and indeed whether that kind of crisis, at least that it's being labeled, is indeed the case.
Well, no, you first off realize journalists want to be something else. They'd rather write a novel or get a book done. They're just jealous. For me, it's changed. I don't think it's changed fundamentally. People walk into a room. There's still comics working without talking about what's going on out there. It's folks really. For me, the difficulty is from the very beginning. There are two difficulties. One, I find it of all the people who've ever run for office, and won the office of the presidency. This is the first time he gets so much time. So much time and attention is given to him that I, as a comedian, don't want to give him attention. Two, he's writing the material. I mean, literally, when he started running, I said, how am I supposed to satirize what's already satiric? How do you make something funnier that's already funny? As I said in the interview, Melania Trump, her pet thing is that the thing she wants to do, you know, like, is bullying. I mean, what do you say? How do you top that? What are you going to do? We're going to shake that up? Paul Scaramucci or... I have never also ever seen, and this is different than anything else I've ever witnessed, except for maybe Vaughn Meader, and when the Kennedy, the First Family hit, and Vaughn Meader nailed his voice and came up with all of those albums. As soon as he brings out one of these characters to talk to us, there's somebody, like, you know, what's her name, McCarthy, you know, immediately, within 2 weeks, she's doing Sean Spicer. A good friend of mine, Mario Cantone, who's a very, very funny guy, immediately, 2 days after Scaramouche does that, you know, fucky fuck speech, he's, you know, Mario's on the air with get the pompadour, he's doing the whole thing.
Before I get into other questions, just an announcement.
Sure.
From our crew here, Karen Karp, if you are in the amphitheater, would you please contact the usher at gate 4 for a message? Sorry to bring it down.
No, that's great. Now I'm going to wonder what the hell happened there.
Question from Twitter. You talk about the need to teach comedy and work that muscle of comedy in the schools. A question from Twitter. What are resources you would recommend to teach young people about comedy as an art form?
I'm available if the price is right. You teach it, you know, there's no way to teach it, but there is, you know, there's a variety of comics who, you know, that I came out of in other fashions, Shelley Berman, Bob Newhart. There are a ton of comics working now that you just play it for them. And then talk about what made you laugh. Why'd you think that was funny? That's the way I teach it. I mean, the great thing about teaching stand-up is I have the kids who are in the class. They basically do the critiquing. That's how you teach comedy. And by having the class critique and you keep your mouth shut, except for like guidance, those kids then begin to develop a critical eye about it. Then there's books. I mean, Vonnegut is the perfect book for, you know, there's Julius Caesar, but there's also, you know, Cat's Cradle. Slaughterhouse-Five, if it's not banned in your county, is a good one. And so those are the, you know the books. You don't, As You Like It is funny, but it's, skip it. Get to the stuff they get. Comic books, cartoons, Rocky and Bullwinkle. There's a ton of stuff out there. Turn on Adult Swim. They're already watching it. Some of it will offend the hell out of you.
This person writes, everyone talks about the civil rights issues raised by Lenny Bruce's stand-up. Why do we avoid talking about the still relevant content of his act, which is his critique of religion?
I did that already. I wrote a whole book on it. What else do you want from me? I did. I wrote a whole book on my feelings about religion and what I think of it. And, I mean, and there are comics who are still doing it. You just get, we're just, the thing that made what Lenny did stand out was, he threw the gauntlet down. It's just not as offensive anymore. So people don't, it's like, so people, since it's not as offensive to talk about it, it doesn't have that kind of attention. That's really what I believe. And buy the book. My book's really good.
You had mentioned, two people who naturally were gifted as comedians. This person's asking, who were those two naturals?
The two naturals. One is Kathleen Madigan. If you don't, she's right up your alley. I'm serious. She's right up everyone in this room's alley. You can see her on YouTube and go. She's terrific. She was an absolute natural. I was working the road when I ran into her, and she'd been working for 8 months, and it just pissed me off to watch her. She has that natural gift. And the other is a guy named T.P. Mulrooney, who kind of really never pursued it on that level. He does a lot of golf outings now. But by God, he walked on stage the first time and had a whole set and was brilliant.
Another question from Twitter. How did comedians become better at disseminating information than journalists?
You know what I heard? Because what was great was before I came out here, the sound person said there's a lot of loss of hearing out there. And I'm part of the problem. I thought you said, why are vegans? And I thought, wow, what a spectacular question. They eat carrots, they can see further. Why are comedians better at it than journalists? Well, because we keep our eye on the ball in part, and because of the natural setup. And what The Daily Show discovered was that these people were saying this stuff, and then denying they were saying it. Then you just put it on again. The great thing about Trump is he really doesn't care. He said it and goes, oh, I didn't say it. I never said it. And then he'll say what he thinks he said. Again, it's just spectacular. I think where journalists miss the point is that they keep focusing on the pathology of Donald Trump and the psychology of Donald Trump instead of this discussion of the pathology of Congress unable to pass a health care bill. They focus, go out and find out the information necessary so that we, the public, can figure out what do we really want to do as regards health care. We need information. That's part of what a journalist is supposed to do. And it's one of the things that makes John Oliver's show so extraordinary, because he actually goes out and gets information.
Why are we so uncomfortable with bawdy female comics, and who are your favorites?
Bawdy female comics. Who's uncomfortable? Like 6 of you? Well, first of all, I've never heard, the word bawdy is like 1956. Bawdy.
Did you ever feel like leaving comedy, and why? Other than this moment right now.
No. No. Other than this morning, no. No, I haven't. I've always, once I found it, and that it, because it was really, I went to school to be a playwright, and that really has worked out. But what it did to allow me to do was be able to write and get my writing out there. And what's really crazy is I don't write. I mean, I wrote this, but I don't write. When I do my act on stage, I just think about it, and then I write in front of people. That's what I'm doing on stage. So, and that's always, and that I've found an audience that allows me to do that and enjoys that, has made it easier. And as long as I continue to, and I was always learning something every night. So it was, why I want to continue to do it. But I'll tell you, the next time, if I come up with an act, I ain't going to be yelling and screaming. I'm coming out on a gurney with an IV drip. Lie there in front of you. It's going to be lie-down comedy.
Is there anything you find less funny now that you've been doing comedy for several years? Do you say, that's funny, instead of laughing sometimes?
Oh, yeah, a lot of stuff. But that's just because I'm a jaded prick. I mean, if you watch a group of comics at the back of a room, most of the time they're sitting there. It's just because we know it. Because, part of it, what makes comedy work, I think, is because it's in its own way, and I hate to compare it to this, but it's like a magic trick. It's like, ho-ho! We just kind of are doing something over here, and you kind of are distracted, and then we nail you. And so I think that, so for part of us, and it really has to be, funny. And then somebody every so often will stumble on something, and you go, wow, I'll see Jim Gaffigan. If you've never seen Gaffigan on Thursday, I guess he's Thursday night. And he always does something that really makes me laugh hard, that he stumbled on something, and it just, and once again, irritates me. I go, I should have thought of that.
Person asks, what do you think of Stephen Colbert? Does he go too far?
Did you listen to the speech? No. I think Stephen is a bona fide genius, and I think that and I keep believing with him, that the toughest thing for Stephen was making a transition from that character, which is truly the character that he did. There's been nothing like that comically in the history, at least of American comedy, where, there were people like Professor Irwin Corey, who would come on and act like a professor, literally be silent for 2 minutes and be wandering around dressed like a professor, and he would not say anything, and he'd start to say something, and then he, after 2 minutes, would say, however. So the few guys who came up, his character that he came up with, he came up with the character that was a satire. I just had never seen anything like that he just portrayed, created a satiric character and created the satire from that character. And for years, and so the transition from that to doing what is essentially that late night slot, which has a whole ton of baggage on it, including we're not going to hire females, this is what late night television is. It's a guy sitting behind a desk, and don't you fucking forget it. So he's strung up with that, but that transition, I think that Trump was a blessing. Many others have written about it. It was that because he could then not be that character, then he could just be Stephen talking about him. And I think he hasn't gone too far. Who hasn't gone far is the Congress of the United States.
Which leads me to my next question. You said that comedy insulates us from insanity. What would happen if we taught stand-up to elected officials?
The whole idea of that makes me want to just take a nap. What's amazing is they don't even, what's incredible is how many of those guys and the women, they're not, what is that? That's the kind of, these bugs, that's the problem here too. There's a lot of creepy, crawly things around here, and if I get bit, I'll be filing suit. There's, to teach them stand-up comedy, they can't even, they need like a charisma class, a lot of them. A lot of them don't even know how to public speak. I mean, talk about astonishing. Hillary Clinton's problem one of them was that she was not comfortable standing up in front of people and talking. How many years was she doing it? Even comics who just pound it night after night, eventually, create the armor and get it. How? Thousands of speeches, and not one, you never clicked in for? I don't believe it. I really don't. And get all of the people that I know who've been in a room with her say, oh, boy, if you're in a room with her, wow. Well, bring her on stage. I saw Robert Dole. I had an interview with Robert Dole, and remember, Robert Dole ran for office, and everybody was, wow, ooh, Robert Dole. Then he did the Viagra ad, and everybody was like, wow, where was that guy? So I interviewed him, and this is the problem we have with politicians. In a really good example, he was chatting with me. He was great. It was the Viagra Robert Dole. Great guy. Somebody you think, okay, this is how Congress was working, that you could see Robert Dole sitting with Teddy Kennedy and enjoying each other's company. And then he said, he was talking about something, a bill that Ted Kennedy had brought up. And it was about, because I was talking about taxes. And then he does a perfect Ted Kennedy. And it was funny. And then he said, and then I responded, and then he started talking like Robert Dole, who ran for the presidency. He became that Robert Dole. You see, a lot of these people think that they talk like they're there's some sort of if I talk like this, I'm a leader. No, you jackass. So it was extraordinary. I mean, it was like watching a schizophrenic. Because seeing it that close together, I was like, holy shit, he doesn't even hear himself. So no, I don't want to teach these pricks stand up.
Last question. It wasn't a joke, it was just a statement. In this world where almost everything is funny, do you think we will eventually become desensitized to comedy?
It's not going to be good for business. No, I don't think we do. Because the first time you hear a knock-knock joke, wow, believe it, knock-knock, who's there? You're screaming. You're 3 years old. It's the funniest thing you ever heard. And then you hear about 20 more, and you go, got to come up with something new. And that's what happens. They always come up with something new. Comedy evolves, but it's basically the same. It's tension release. Tension rises in the room. And then all of a sudden it needs a place to go. It goes into laughter. Have a good day.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lewis Black.